In Arcane, there are no heroes and no villains. One of the main points of the series is Powder's descent into madness, to which we have a front row seat. Thematically, this scene fits very well with the rest of Arcane, showing us the duality of things. We see the story from Silko's side, where he is the hero and Vander is the villain. And this shot of Vander's face, darkened out, really emphasizes this. The water scene of Silko feels symbolic for rebirth. We're never told exactly why Vander tries to kill Silko here, which is interesting in of its own point. Instead, the scene focuses on Silko and what he is going through at this moment. It implies that he changed after Vander did this to him, not just from the wound that he has on his face, but mentally as well. He became the person we see him as because of Vander. Episode 3 is going to have a bit of a focus on Silko and his attack on Vander, so placing the scene here at the beginning of the episode lays the groundwork, putting this in our minds, giving justification to the villain for his actions, which is also important for making a good villain. A villain that just wants to destroy for just being evil is boring. But here we at least get to understand the reason for Silko's actions and the reason why he is the way he is. Notice also how the flashback scene is similar to the two for Vi and Powder and Jayce in episodes 1 and 2, putting Silko as a more important character in our minds. However, unlike the first two episodes, this scene is not silent. It still exhibits show don't tell, but focuses on Silko at this moment on the precipice of death. Arcane expertly knows what words need to be said and what needs to be show don't tell. And I don't know if this was intentional by the writers. The fact that we aren't told everything about why this is happening almost makes me want to hang off every word said between Silko and Vander in this episode, just to try and figure out what happened. Though this could also be because the backstory either just didn't fit in the episode or needed more time to be told. But I definitely thought about the scene more as a result, and had this scene stick in my head for many episodes to come. I know I've said this many times, but show don't tell is just at its best here. Vi's hands are shaking. Her hands are shaking, showing us that she is afraid, scared of her fate that awaits her. I recently watched the latest episode of Attack on Titan, and there is a scene here of Mikasa leaving her scarf. You don't need to know what, if you haven't watched Attack on Titan, you don't need to know what's going on here, right? But the scarf is significant for her. We know this. Everyone who watches the show know this. This scene did not need another person to be here going, "Hey Mikasa, are you leaving your scarf?" We didn't need that. We just needed to see a silent scene of Mikasa putting the scarf down and just looking at it as though struggling with herself of whether she should take it or not. And that says so much more than having this other character in the scene and going, hey, you know, basically telling us, hey, this scarf, it has relevance to Mikasa and she is leaving it. Now, Attack on Titan does have really good elements of show don't tell, but I had to emphasize this scene in particular because the scarf, of which is the main focus in this scene, is not one of those show don't tell elements. And this is the thing that needed to be show don't tell. And the reason why I just wanted to show this is it's, you know, show don't tell, you might think show don't tell is an easy thing, but it's actually really, really difficult to come by good show don't tell in present day writing for many things. But back to Arcane. This is a sad scene that I feel almost focuses on the consequences of one's actions. Vi is waiting to be taken away, to take responsibility for her actions. Vander is choosing himself to be taken, bearing his responsibilities as a father. Marcus cursing the fact that he made a deal with Silko, the monster created by Vander. This scene feels like the consequences of everyone's actions coming to bear fruit in the worst possible way. They are only where they are because of Vi, only known to Silko because of Marcus, and only even in danger because of what Vander tried to do years prior. The way Silko speaks here is not happy. There is no glee that he has captured Vander, which is a testament, I feel, to the depth of his character. This look in his eyes says so much, in how he feels no satisfaction by what he is doing. The music seemingly reflecting his own heart in this moment. Vander was someone close enough to be his brother at one point. I feel like Silko wants Vander to see what the nation of Zaun could be like. He wants Vander to understand him, to go back to the way things were before. Again, this is just a little bit of speculation on my part, but you can really feel those in-depth emotions just by the look of his expression. My original thought was that Silko and Vander had a falling out over Vander wanting to stop fighting, but Silko wanting to continue. But in the scene, we see a much younger Vander try to kill Silko than the one on the bridge in episode 1. And Silko mentions here that Vander held his respect, even after Vander tried to kill him, but it was only when he decided to make that deal with the enforcers that he lost Silko's respect. We know that they were as close as brothers, and we know they both wanted to make the independent nation of Zaun, but there really isn't enough information to know why Vander betrayed him, at least not yet, not in Season 1. This is another scene on how Arcane loves to do multiple things, and also shows how Arcane spruces up what would otherwise be a tedious scene. Jayce and Victor breaking into Heimerdinger's lab had to happen. We know this, and we had to see it happen, as having a scene where they simply appear in the lab would feel off. However, just having a scene where they break into the lab would be boring, at least in comparison to the rest of the show. And that is why Mel appears here. We need conflict to happen in this scene. Someone unexpected to make the scene interesting, and Arcane says, well, might as well include Mel here and emphasize how cunning she is, and build up her character in our minds. We know that the counselors don't necessarily live in the tower, and at this late in night, she's not exactly doing the duty of the security guard. If you put a little thought into it, I really feel like Mel probably had Jayce watched, knowing that he might try something, that if he was worth his salt, if he was worth betting on, then he would try to sneak back in and get his research, and she was going to be there to, try and facilitate that in some way. To probably being informed that he was actually going to the tower, she decided to take that opportunity and give him that chance, knowing what could come of it, knowing that it could help fulfill her dream for putting Piltover on the map. Powder sees Vi's fear here, and it's interesting that Powder appears unafraid for Vander, seemingly only caring if Vi is in trouble and how Vi is feeling. Powder has always been trying to fit in with the family, but here we start to see hints of deeper issues. She's seen at the start of the scene stroking the toy that Vi gave her, and when news comes in about Vander, Powder is focused on Vi. While the others comfort Vi, Powder immediately starts to pack. It's like the only thing on her mind is, how can I be useful? How can I fit in? If I was more useful, then maybe Vi wouldn't have gone away and left me. Vi, however, wants Powder to be safe. This isn't a robbery. This is going against the monster she saw. I love how this conflict is natural and how we can relate to both sides of this. One wanting to protect their sibling and one just wanting to fit in. And even knowing that you're old enough, but not being treated like an adult. Powder has attachment issues. She needs to be attached to someone, and Vi is that person. Out of everyone in the world, Vi gives her comfort and makes her feel safe. And warmth, care and safety is important for anyone's psyche and development, and these characteristics can even be witnessed in animals. And for Powder, it's important for her self-esteem and development that she be able to contribute to the group. Vi has always been sticking up for Powder, but you can tell that Powder has many concerns about what Vi really feels. This is shown in episode 1, where she overhears Vi saying that Milo is right about her, but doesn't hear that it was a joke. All of her fears and concerns are brought to fruition in this one moment where Vi tells her that she is not ready, right to her face. The scene showing a close-up of her expression. Vi puts a hand on her cheek, and Powder understands why she can't go, though the knowledge doesn't help her feeling abandoned and alone. The two touching heads show how much they matter to each other, almost more than sisters, almost like a parent and child. But Powder is left alone in the dark as they leave. What I want to concentrate to begin with in this scene is what Vi says here. Wherever you are, light it up and I'll find you, I promise. We're building up to the climax of Act 1, and this is a major red flag. There is a principle in writing called Chekhov's gun that states that every element in a story must be necessary and irrelevant elements should be removed so as not to appear to make false promises. An example of this would be the gauntlets in Vander's bar, where Vander mentions that he doesn't want to put them on again. We can infer from this that they will be used in the future, or Vander will fight in the future again. The flair Vi gives Powder is the same. It would not be in the story if it is not going to be used. The reason this principle states to remove anything irrelevant is to not make false promises. Imagine if Vi promises Vander that they will meet again, but they never do. It would feel unsatisfying to us viewing the show and leave a bad taste in our mouths. That is why 99% of the time, if a promise is made, i.e. the flare being given to Powder, and the promise to us that she will use it, it will happen. But what is more frightening is the context in which it's supposed to be used. Again, wherever you are, light it up, and I will find you. I promise. If not for this line, we could believe that Powder might use this later in the episode to show the group where to run if they escape from Silko. But Vi is clearly saying to us that it will be used when they are both separated and don't know where each other are. This is like a promise to us watching that it will be used in this way, and this creates a foreboding that something will go wrong and these two sisters will be separated. Stories never really focus on the mental effects of being left behind, of what it means to be the hero's sidekick, for example, likely due to these being darker themes of showing unexpected consequences and things that would paint the hero in a darker light. But that's what I really like about Arcane, always showing that there are two sides to a story, two sides to an action. Piltover and the Undercity, Vander and Silko, and now Vi and Powder. If we didn't see before, we really start to see how deep the issues are that Powder has. Powder has a panic attack due to her abandonment issues, showing how painful it is for her to be left behind. She is breaking the things that are most precious to her because they aren't good enough, meaning that she wasn't good enough. But when she sees that she can help, the tears stop. I think as well as removing any guilt she might be feeling from what she did. She took the Hextech, and that has caused a bunch of trouble for the Undercity, and even Vi to almost be taken away. But if she can use that very same Hextech to save them from Silko, a seemingly unrelated threat to her at this moment, then her actions can be validated, as well as her use to her sister and her family. I like how Jayce is remembering what his saviour did when he was a kid. It explains why he is able to create this technology and no one else is, especially those older and wiser than him. Just like how Echo tells Clagger how he got the tip about Jayce's apartment, Arcane goes the extra mile on closing any kind of plot holes in the story. This scene has also been put here purposefully. One being the climax of Jayce's story in Act 1, which is the lesser of the two main stories, Vi and Powder's being the greater. And two, to show and emphasize the power of the Hextech crystals, or perhaps more specifically, not just to show what they are capable of, but how hard they are to control. Jayce was only able to control it because he had seen this person cast some spell as a child, and because of years of research. As the scene turns to Powder, it focuses right away on the crystals as Powder is trying to make them work in her toy. And we know that Powder cannot control them. She doesn't know what she is doing. She doesn't have the years of research nor the first-hand knowledge of any spell. All of the emotions we had from the high of the last scene instantly turn to dread, like the flip of a coin. Again, like two sides are being shown. Powder touches heads with her toy, which parallels the way she and Vi touched heads earlier. She wants to prove to herself that she can contribute. And herein lies the perfect tragedy of this story. What almost everything has been building up to, from the accident of blowing up Jayce's apartment, to the miscommunications, to seeing her devices failing, to constantly being called a Jinx. Vi beats Silko's goons and manages to hold back Monster Deckard. Milo managed to get Vander out of his cuffs, and Clagger has secured an escape route for them. Every one of them working together has managed to pull off a miracle. But then Powder, the one who wants so much to be accepted, tries to help with only the best of intentions. I mentioned in episode 1 how the writers excellently defy our expectations. We see Powder's devices not working in episode 1. This is another promise made to the audience, that one day they will work. And with no knowledge of what is going to happen, we assume that one day, when that happens, Powder will be accepted into the group. So when this scene is first delivered, we believe that this is that moment. This is the time her device will work, and with it, she will save her family. It's an easy future to see, and with Powder falling in this scene, she feels like she's finally been accepted. But in the moment that her device works, it does not save her family, but kills them. Risking your life for another is not something just anyone does, even if you're on Silko's payroll. This act of Sevika pushing Silko out the way adds a ton to her character, that she was willing to do this. And again, this is another attention to detail that Arcane loves to do so much. Like Echo tailing Jayce before, it answers any questions that we might have had. Showing her in the bar arguing with Vander tells us that she is not happy with the situation, and this is enough context to understand here that she must want what Silko wants, and to that end she's willing to lose her life to obtain it. Vander fighting here is fulfilling the promise that we saw earlier when he points to the gauntlets and tells Marcus that he doesn't want to have to take them down. The two fighting one another again, the memories of that day likely flashing back for the both of them. We see how Silko cuts Vander on the arm, the same arm he brushes when he says there are worse things out there in episode 1. We don't need words to know how hard this is for both of them. We even see Vander's head pressed against Silko's, much like how Vi did for Powder, symbolising how the two of them were as close as the sisters at one point. And in the scene, it's almost like Vander is fighting with himself. He regrets the betrayal. What he's currently doing is something the old, violent Vander would do. He wanted so much to resolve things peacefully, but in the end he had to resort to violence. He had to let the old Vander out. Powder wants affirmation from Vi, so she proudly runs to her, telling her that her bomb worked. However, she sees that the worst has happened, and she will have to live with this guilt. Vi has just lived through the death of 3 of her family members, and due to her upset emotions, she is not really thinking, and thus just reacts most naturally for her, which is violence. But what hurts Powder the most is the abandonment, and Vi confirming that she is a Jinx. Vi seeing the blood on her hands, she realises that she needs to calm down before she makes anything worse, and walks away to do so. But Powder sees this as her sister abandoning her. Silko caused all of this, but Powder is under so much emotional distress at the moment that she needs affection from anyone, even if that person is the bad guy. Marcus's dialogue in this scene is a little off to me. He knocks out Vi and says he'll kill you if he hears you. Come on, let's go. I've pointed out so many good points about Arcane, I have to also point out some minor negatives. To me, this just feels weird. The dialogue is though he wants to help Vi and that he's on her side, but he's already knocking her out. And we know from later that he very likely uses Vi to get his promotion to Enforcer Chief. This act is done either on his own desire for promotion or to make the deaths of the other Enforcers not for nothing, or both potentially, which is why the dialogue is off. And considering Arcane's attention to detail, it feels off. I mean, in the scene after the battle, we can see him moping on the bridge. His mask is discarded and his hat is not on his head, symbolising that at this point he's not an enforcer in his own eyes. But in the scene with Vi, he's wearing it again, and I feel like this is intentional, telling us that in that time from the explosion that he saw to when he finds Vi, he's kind of straightened himself out and remembers why he's there, what he needs to do, what his duty is. I feel like this is a scene that may have been rewritten at the last moment. Perhaps initially Vi spots Marcus and he uses those lines to gain her trust and get close enough to her to knock her out. But at the last moment they decided a quicker scene would be a better fit. I do like how all the pieces are used, however. Marcus still being in the Undercity and coming into play in this final moment is like the perfect twisted end to this tragedy. And finally Silko. He sees the parallels in Powder and her sister to himself and Vander, and in that moment he relates to her and understands her. He sees himself in her and knows exactly what to say in that moment. And you can see the look of anger from Powder here, almost like she's saying, I'm going to prove to you that I'm good enough and strong enough, and that you shouldn't have abandoned me. I feel like Act 1 is probably the strongest act in the show. It's focused on what it needs to be focused on, with little extra fluff, and has a proper beginning, middle and end. Jayce's section is incorporated in just the right amount and in just the right way. Jayce is wholly unimportant to the events of the Undercity in Act 1, except for the Hextech crystal. They could have had Act 1 without him, but that would have been a detriment to the story because having him shows us the other side of that coin. The goings-on of Piltover and how it is run, but most importantly, setting up for Act 2. One of the greatest things in stories is experiencing how characters change, what they were like at point A to what they have become at point B. Vi was headstrong and gun-ho at the start, but now feels like the oldest out of her group, maturing and wising up enough to take responsibility for her own actions. And Powder, the most tragic of all, wants to prove herself worthy, but now in a very different way, scarred from the experiences she has gone through. Jayce is more of a sub-story, but still goes through a crisis of his faith in himself and his own research, only for it to be reignited by Victor. And this is just Act 1. Their stories are not finished and their journey to point B not yet over. But even just partway through, we can see how they are already changing as people. One of the other really important things I love about Arcane Act 1 is that every scene is packed full of information, both told and untold, making you want to concentrate fully on the show so that you don't miss any detail. Arcane Act 1 is really excellent in how complete of a story it feels, whilst also setting up for the future. So this is the character map for episode 3. Now, one thing you'll probably notice is that it hasn't expanded that much from episode 2. There's been no new character introductions, and that's how it should be. Generally, Act 1 is kind of a complete story, and we're not really going to see many new characters or links created after that kind of 2/3 mark, because in general, a new character being introduced, towards the end of the story it's kind of unsatisfying, kind of weird that kind of unsatisfying, especially if they have like a bigger role to play in the story. So all of the character introductions and setup, especially those who have bigger roles in the story, need to be done earlier on in the story. And that's why we don't really see any new character introductions in this episode. I've added a skull and crossbone for all of the characters that have died in this episode. We've had a lot of deaths. We've had a lot of deaths in this episode. I think probably the most named deaths out of any episode of Arcane. I've put the lines going from Silko to Grayson and Benzo as killed rather than from Deckard, because Silko, even though Deckard was the one who killed them, Silko was the one responsible for it. He was the one who gave the order to kill them. And Silko was also kind of responsible for Vander's death as well. Whereas Vander was the one who kills Monster Deckard, and Powder is the one who is mostly responsible for killing her family, Milo and Clagger. There's also a few new links on here. Mainly Vi and Powder, their status kind of changed into abandoned now, because Powder feels that Vi abandoned her. There's also now a link between Powder and Silko, which I've kind of put as a question mark because we don't truly really find out what this means in this episode. But we do find out that, Silko almost becomes like a foster father for Powder in the future. I neglected to put a link between Powder and Singe, because even though Singe does get caught up in this explosion, there doesn't seem to really be kind of any ramifications from it in the future, other than him working not obviously in the same lab. And I have a link between Powder and Savika. Because of Powder's explosion, Savika loses her arm, and we see her get that robot arm kind of in the future. I think there is also more to this than her just getting the robot arm, but that will be discussed in the later episodes when we kind of start to see their relationship with one another. Apart from that, there hasn't really been any new changes up here other than Victor becoming Jayce's partner. Again, this episode mainly focuses on the Undercity and has a much less of a focus on the on Piltover. And obviously in this episode, Savika becomes the bodyguard for Silko. So there are, it definitely looks like there are more linking off in this episode from events that have happened in this episode. But as per usual, no real new characters being introduced in these episodes, because this is like the end of Act 1, the end of a story in a way. And that has been my analysis for Act 1 of Arcane. Thank you very, very much for watching, especially if you've gotten to this point. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and want to know when episode 4 is going to be coming out. I've left a link in the description to the first chapter of the book I'm currently writing if you feel like checking that out. This has been That's Effing Rich. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.